Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to see everyone from class here today. Najua tumezoea kuonana selt sana, so it's good to see us dressed and ready to have a good evening. So my name is Debbie Wangui Kiharu. I am the class representative for the class before us today, and I also serve as the chairperson of the dinner committee. So the purpose of this session is basically to have a basic understanding of the parliamentary processes that happen and how they relate to engineers today. So as we know, Parliament is divided into two houses. We have the National Assembly and the Senate, and our guest here today is in Parliament. So as engineers, our work every day basically consists of using our problem-solving skills in structural, transport, water, public health. But as Mheshimiwa has mentioned, and also Engineer Kinoti, policy and governance plays a very important role in our development as engineers. So maybe to start us off, Mheshimiwa, tell us who is Ndindi Nyoro away from Parliament?
Thank you very much, Debbie. Ndindi Nyoro away from Parliament is Ndindi Nyoro. Basically, some of the things I enjoy doing is everything around investments. Investments take many fronts: private equity, venture capital. I don't think there is anything you can ask me about Nairobi Securities Exchange that I have not interacted with, because I've seen engineers can start things, but you can get a chance of owning them by investing in those ideas. And that is basically everything about venture capital, private equity, which I started doing since campus, in terms of NSC, but of course the other two later on. And of course from there, apart from investments, I was looking around to see the kind of football team people support here. Besides that, besides being in Parliament, besides investments, I also support Man U.
Okay, you also mentioned Deng Xiaoping.
Because I read a lot. I mean, anytime I'm not anywhere, you can be sure I am either holding a book or a magazine. If it's a book, it will be about economics. If it's about economics, majorly about Asia, because Asia relates more with Africa, only that they have gone ahead. If it's not that, you will always get a Forbes magazine in my vehicle, or there's a magazine called Entrepreneur, Economist, because I read them and I feel like I'm in holiday.
Okay, so paint us a picture then of the timeline of the budget making process from when it starts to completion, with mention of the budget review paper, the BPS, and finally the appropriation bill.
The planning of a country's financials or policies starts with a broader one, which is more encompasses a longer period. In Kenya, we have it called Vision 2030. Every country will have their years. In China, for example, they made one in 2015 called Made in China 2025. Every country will have a longer term kind of planning. From there, it comes to medium term. Medium term is where you find something like BROP, that budget policy paper. It encompasses, let's say, depending on the country, majorly 5 years. And then from there, the country makes something called budget policy statement. It gives limits of expenditure for each department or MDA. And the very latest document that is made is called the estimates, which culminates into becoming the Appropriations Act when it is signed. It gives authority for those MDAs now to spend monies, public money. Now, the reason I have given that background is that because all are important. When a country starts deviating from making the current budget to address the vision that was made earlier, then growth becomes haphazard. Then secondly, as you may be aware as engineers, majority of the programs and projects of government are multi-year. And therefore, if you make a budget that does not speak to last year's one and does not speak to the next financial year's one, then you may not end up making a coherent budget. The previous one has to be spoken to by this current one, and the future one has to find a voice in the current one. Because if, for example, Engineer Kenyatta has a project that has a period of implementation of 3 years, then it needs to be spoken to by 3 budgets. That is why that happens. On the other side, the country comes up with something called the revenue-raising measures. In Kenya, it has come to be known as the finance bill. Now, the only thing that we need to look at as a country is that that kind of a bill should not be made every year. Because if every year investors foresee there will be changes in policy, either in taxation or in other policies affecting their businesses, they are not able to plan for the long term. So in many countries, and that is what used to happen in Kenya before, revenue-raising measures were not as drastic. We were able to make one that you can plan with for the next 5 years, only with small variations year on year, so that even you as an investor, you are able to work your medium-term plans based on a policy that may not change so suddenly.
Okay, so I have a specific question about the BPS. I know that the Budget Policy Statement 2025, as you mentioned, it's guided by 2 things: the government agenda, that is better, bottom-up, and also the medium-term plan, Vision 2030. So allow me to ask then, for example, if you have a road project, the average lifespan of tarmac road flexible pavement is around 20 years. The maximum amount of years that a regime can have in this nation is 10 years. So should engineers really be guided by the government agenda, or should they be guided by the long-term plan? Because most of our projects, the lifespan goes into the hundreds of years. For example, dams.
I look at it in 2 ways in terms of engineers. One is in terms of profession, but second is in terms of self-interest. Starting with the self-interest, because that's what becomes an amalgamated macro perspective. I think for me as if I were an engineer, I would look at where can I fit in? And where can I fit in must be guided on where is the government going? Where is the spending going? Where is the policy going? I would, if I were you, I would look at how much is the government investing in what kind of infrastructure? How much is the government spending in roads? What is the projected spending in the road sector? How much is the government spending in the water and sewerage sector? What is likely to be the spending in the medium and longer term? That guides you to see where opportunities are likely to be. In terms of profession, versatility of the profession, of course, government policy is important. To look at, like what you've talked about, the longevity of our projects, so that again goes back to self-interest. You are able to tell between building and maintenance, what is the government giving more weight? And the reason I'm talking about government here is because you realize most of what you end up doing will be government funded. As civil engineer, yes, there are many private opportunities out there, but there are also equally as many around government. I would also look at the trend in terms of the private sector. For example, if you are an engineer in Singapore today, and you are a structural engineer for building houses, in an economy where 93% already own their own homes, you look at the opportunities which are available in that kind of a situation. If you are in Kenya, you can consume even data from KNBS. It's always very good. In fact, I always see, sorry for digressing. If, for example, I come here and quote figures from Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, some people may think I'm already fighting those who are in government. Yet I'll be quoting the same figures made by a government institution. What I'm trying to say is that there is some data you can make good use of from Kenya National Bureau of Statistics because it enumerates so many facets around engineering, infrastructure, and everything else to see where the threats are also in the private sector insofar as your profession is concerned.
Okay. During...
And sorry, let me interrupt a little bit. There is something I talked about tech. You know, one good thing I love about how the world is, there is usually no stopping. Technology always comes to evolve things. Now, for example, everyone with a meter in Kenya, Yastima. I mean, there's no person paying a bill without a meter. But there is a description of those meters. Meaning, there used to be meters, for example, ile ya kitambo ya kutumiwa barua kwa posta. Now, technology came in with a new technology and therefore a new opportunity. Now, if our engineer, for example, in water sector, I'll look at how can I blend my knowledge. Take, for example, metering. We may say they are smart meters, but the beauty about technology, it keeps on upgrading. So you are able to look at where the opportunities are, and where there is lack of opportunity, actually is an opportunity by itself.
Okay. So during Engineer Kinotti's speech, he mentioned policy and the importance of policy and governance. And engineers may feel a little sidelined when it comes to policy making. What advice would you give us to fix ourselves in that process so that we feel like our ideas are being reflected, especially in the legislative arm of government?
There are many things you can do around there. In a country like Kenya that is rather quite open, there is nothing you cannot push to the floor of the House. And there are many routes to that. You can do it as a petition, as a private citizen, as an engineer. You can use a member of parliament to make a debate out of what you want made. But lastly, you also have an opportunity to be that person, being that MP. It is that open in Kenya. That even in the qualifications of how you get elected, you are not asked whether you have a course in politicking. That even an engineer is qualified to be there. And you have many of them in parliament.
I think that's a challenge to engineers in the room, that they should organize and make their voice heard as they wish it to be. So the last part of this session is to ask, so now you've spoken mostly from your national government point of view. So for the county governments, what role can they play in absorbing recent graduates from university, especially in development agendas? And what is your opinion on what can be done better to streamline this process?
Can I paraphrase?
Yes.
What is it that engineers can offer to county governments? Because you've asked what county governments can offer. And I'm asking that because we are always conditioned to look for an opportunity that is already defined. Fortunately or unfortunately, the most defined opportunity we know is a job. So in other words, you're asking me, how can an engineer get a job in a county government? Now, I'll look the other way around.